And welcome to I Protest. This is Donald Jeffries coming to you from just outside the swamp infested of Washington, D.C., as we do every Friday at this time. My special guest today is a good friend, Vince Agnelli. He's one of the few people on earth I think knows more about the Revolutionary era of American history than I do, and he goes into the pre-Revolutionary era as well. So he's a great historian, and he's also one of the best voting fraud experts that I know of. Every election in Virginia, at least in Virginia, he tabulates the shenanigans that are going on, and they're always shenanigans. And so we're going to talk about the recent election that happened here, the I guess a blue wave that swept through us again, thanks to my own Fairfax County and others, and what that portends for the future. Vince, it's always great to talk with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Don. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so so let's talk. And I'm gonna, but while you're talking, I'm gonna try to find you because I should have done that, of course, ahead of time. But as usual, I'm doing things on the fly, so I'm gonna try to find those graphs from your Substack. So go ahead and talk about what you found. Well, maybe first of all, I guess if you want to juxtapose it against when you first started looking into voter fraud and how you specialized in Virginia, and maybe how this election is like the others that you've discovered the fraud that's going on.
The first time that I really became aware of it was after the 2019 election, and I just couldn't understand uh, how the Democrats could run away with the election in 2019. And sure enough, after looking at all of those races, I discovered that the Republican Party refused to run 40% of the open seats. They refused to run candidates for 40% of the open seats. That was a guaranteed lock for their supposed sworn opposition party. And once I put that out there, that really shocked a lot of people. There were, I forget the guy's name here in WMAO. He had a female morning partner, and they actually grabbed two guys, one from Fairfax County, one from the Loudoun County Republican offices. And he put that question to them. It might have even been Vince. Vince, what's his name, who's taken Bongino's spot.
Yes, yes.
At noon. But these two bozos sat there and tried to tell them that they couldn't find anybody to run, and they had lots of candidates who came in to get interviewed, but then there were people they couldn't find someone that they thought would be a good candidate. And that's just a bunch of horse crap. Pardon my language. And I sat there and listened to that. And I shook my head, and don't you know, the WMAL pulled down that interview in about a week later. They pulled it down. And I tried to share it with people. And from that point on, it just became, I must find out how long and how far back this has been going on. And that was a big job. I did that as part of the book, Is It Rigged? That's the orange cover book. And then later on, I found out just how long they've been doing it and put it into the book, The Public Wheel and You. So that's where some of the graphs came from on my last Substack page that shows this very recent comparison. It's horrible that in 2021, the Republican Party decided that they would run 99 of the 100 open seats. They'd run a candidate, and there was one seat they did not. It was the 46th district. Excuse me. And then that had enough up ballot voting to give Glenn Youngkin the edge to win for governor. The time before that, they didn't run, and I have the graph on that page. There's something like 28 of the races. So they know this number that if they don't get enough people coming to the polls to vote, that they're going to lose. So Winsome Sears needs to get an answer or get an apology or something from the Republican Party. And I can give you the counties. Let me just read them off to you. There's 16.
Okay, what I'm doing? Okay, I'm sharing from your
from the
newsletter
page.
out. You tell me if you can see it.
Yeah.
The top graph is that's just the votes. Where do you want to go first?
All right. So now on the left column, you see the district number.
Yep.
And there are 100 districts in Virginia. This is just for the House of Delegates. So in 2021, they ran a candidate in each of those. And the 2021 Democrat votes you see to the right. And there were 3 of those districts the Democrats did not even run somebody. They didn't even, and they still, because the Republicans refused to run somebody in the 46th district, they still won the 49-51. In other words, they still controlled the House. And now you can see 2025, which is the next column over.
Yeah.
Now you can look at those votes. There, some of them are almost twice what happened in 2021. Now that in itself is something I didn't even really approach because it's fairly obvious. There's a lot of people who voted that never even voted for Democrats before. So something's wrong there. And then to the right, you see how many votes the Republicans got in the same race, which is 0. 0. There's no excuse for that. That's fraud in itself.
And how do they? Wouldn't they be able to write in or something? How could there be 0?
Oh, there were write-in votes, but because there's no Republican candidate there.
Okay, so then okay.
There's no Republican marching to the polls, and those people in those districts had no signs up. And maybe they had Winsome Earl Sears, and maybe they didn't. And I didn't go and look to see how many votes that they actually got for governor. But I can guarantee you it's nowhere near what would have happened in 2021. So these guys collect money, Don. This is what really ticks me off. They get out there and they scoop up money from the good people, but they don't tell them they have no intention of winning. They don't tell them that. They just say, give me your money so we can run our race. Why isn't the Department of Justice down here grabbing every single one of these registrars' offices? Why aren't they grabbing all of the tallies? Why aren't they grabbing all of the registrations? I can guarantee you that somewhere in Virginia, 18,000 plus Confederate soldiers are probably on voter registrations.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Mm-hmm.
I know somebody who watched people from the Obama campaign walk through the Hollywood Cemetery taking photographs of each and every headstone. Mm-hmm. Now, why on earth would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not
Lyndon Johnson.
Well, it's not uncommon here in Virginia because they did catch 2 people, one in Rockingham County and one in Fredericksburg, who were doing just that. They were registering people from the graveyards. So, as far as I'm concerned, the Republican Party doesn't want Trump to win anything. They're trying to kneecap him. And that means they probably do the same thing in New York. They probably do the same thing in New Jersey and all of these other states. And here he is inviting this skingeal down from New York today, who he doesn't have to be there. He doesn't have to suck up to these people because he's being told that he's unpopular or that something is wrong. Now, I'm not sticking up for the man. I'm just saying balls and strikes. And here we are again with the Republican Party, and it goes back to 2011 that I did. If you can scroll down on that, you'll see another one of those graphs. I don't know if you can get there.
Yeah, here we go. Right there. 7th congressional fraud.
Okay, so that's the one where what's her name, Spanberger.
Mm-hmm.
She had no track record as a politician. She came out of the CIA.
Yes.
And ran against Dave Bratt. Dave Bratt was the last of the Tea Party candidates that the Tea Party pushed into Congress. So that's the 7th. That's down around Richmond. So you can see what happens with the graph. Non-presidential years, the vote tallies go down, and in presidential years, more people show up for the polls. So there again, I'm talking about up ballot voting. And then look what happens when she runs against Dave Bratt. All of a sudden, they came up with about 80, and a difference of about 80,000 votes. And then, boom, he's gone. She's in, and that launches her career.
Yeah.
I mean, Dave Bratt was very popular. He was very popular down there. And of course, the next graph below that is it goes back to 2011. That blue line, it shows you how many delegate races they did not put up a candidate for.
Do the Democrats, you said in the one
No.
graph, 3, right? The Democrats don't do this normally?
The Democrats do it on occasion.
It's just an occasion, yeah.
On occasion. And that to me spells engineering.
Collusion.
Okay. Yeah, that's collusion. And I guess at this point, they wanted to make sure that the Democrats won by a large amount. So one of our friends, I won't say his name, reported to me that he went up in the Herndon polling area trying to do his early voting. And the 2 days he went, there was a line out of this place, and he couldn't wait. But most of the people had blue hair or colored hair or something like that. You know, from that area where he lives, you know that that's not common.
Right.
There's not a lot of those people living there. They're mostly Hispanic, or they are of Arab persuasion. So I know that's phony baloney.
Absolutely. Well, it's just. I mean, but in these races where they don't run everybody. I mean, doesn't anyone at the local level question it? You're the only one I've heard that's mentioned this. Like, don't you have candidates that want to run? None of them talk about, hey, the Republicans won't let me run. This is just amazing to me, because you always have people that want to run.
To me, Don, this is the biggest story right now. Here we have proof. This is prima facie. It's proof. The Republican Party is a scammer, and it's in cahoots with the Democrat Party. It's, as people say, uniparty. It's engineered. We really don't have a government, my friend.
There's no question about it. That's just, I mean, it gets a line of the competition thing anyhow, because there's no more graphs, I guess. Okay, but interesting stuff. And guys, go to let's go up here to V. Agnelli Jr. newsletter. Vince puts out great work. Of course, he's got, I assume that's George Mason. There's your logo there. We're going to talk about him, because Vince is the.
And that's my original newsletter. Of course, the Public Wheel is also the same. I've got that address right there, the Substack address. So.
Yeah, well, we're going to give it out later too. And you should be subscribing to Vince if you don't already. And as Vince is, most people know Vince and I, excuse me, came together as friends through David Knight. Talk a little bit of you were. I had heard you on David Knight back in the day when he was on InfoWars still. I think he was still on InfoWars then.
Yep.
And I thought, well, I mean, I liked listening to you. And then David contacted me at some point and said that you had, I guess, heard me on David Knight, and wondered how close we lived together. And of course, we lived close enough together to have lunch every month. And it's the rest is history, as they say.
Well, when you said you were inside the Beltway, I'm thinking, oh, geez, I know that place. I grew up there, so.
Yeah, I'm living in. People say, why don't you move? But you get to, at any age, but especially if you get older, it's like, I've got a house full of just so much. It would be such a chore to move. Yeah, I mean, I realize I'm in the wrong county, but my whole family is here, and this is like. Said I wonder, even if I thought they were counting the votes honestly, which I don't, but even if I did, what's the point of voting? Because there's no way my vote's going to count in my county.
That's it. Any county, and it doesn't matter. With this kind of crap, they wipe the whole election system off the board. That's why I say I think they should have the Department of Justice come down here and investigate every single one of these registrar's offices. Look at all the registered voters. They have to. If they don't,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, you were going to say something about if Trump.
Well, no, if Trump was legitimate or anybody, I mean, if I'm the leader or the head of the Republican National Committee, I don't know who that is now, but didn't. Oh, that what's is Lara Trump, isn't it? Isn't she the head of the Republican National Committee? I think. I think he replaced that terrible woman with her. I think. So if this is a competitive thing, if it's not a a psyop,
Yeah,
if it's supposed to be like like every other aspect of our rigged economy, supposed to be competition when John D. Rockefeller said competition's a sin. Apparently, competition in politics is a sin too, because why wouldn't the Republicans want to win? If I'm the head of the Republican National Committee, I'm going to say, "Hey, we're not even running people in and that was the case here many times. And my awful, the late beloved Jerry Connolly, who just died last year, but he was here forever. And to be fair, we had a Republican before that, Tom Davis, who was the same kind of way. Nobody runs against these people,
yeah,
hardly ever. So what kind of opposition party doesn't put up a candidate? I don't understand. How do they even explain that?
they don't. They really. I mean, they avoid it like the plague. I can remember last year I ran across a guy who was the vice chair in Prince William County for the Republican Party, and I told him all of this business. He just looked at me like I had antenna coming out of my head, like I was from Mars.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't believe it. And it's like I said,
Yeah.
I got that list, and Prince William County is one of those places where they don't. This is not the first time, by the way, with them. And I know a couple of old former delegates who shared Prince William County, and that county is just run by people who are engineers. They're not serious. And let me tell you about the law. I don't know about the other states. I kind of think it's the same. In Virginia, you do not have to live in the district that you represent. You can live, as long as you live in the state, you can represent another district. That goes all the way back to Patrick Henry. You know, Patrick Henry, where he first, out in the western part of the state, where he first became, actually wasn't even a state yet. He became a member of the Burgesses. He didn't live there. He lived over towards Richmond. But the people out in the valley said, we need somebody who can represent us. And since that point, that's been the case. People are allowed to go to another district to represent them. So they can't tell me that the Republican Party of Virginia couldn't find 16 names, 16 people to get on the ballot. That's horse crap.
Mm-hmm.
It should be taken to these guys need to be taken to prison. Like I said, this is fraud. They get out there and they grab money.
Yeah, they're always asking for money. That's for sure.
Pretending that they're going to run some kind of stand up for this and stand up for that. And if Winsome Sears didn't know this, then maybe she shouldn't have been governor anyway. If they didn't.
Well, I think she was a big part of the problem. I think she was kind of an empty suit, and all I saw. I mean, I'm glad the election is over because, and I know people aren't in Virginia. This is the point is lost on them. Probably you saw the same thing all over the country, but I watch a lot of YouTube stuff, and that Abigail Spanberg, I would not have voted for just because of the relentless commercials. It was nonstop. It was annoying, the same stuff over and over, and all she did is kept playing clip after clip of the Republican saying, "I am speaking," or something, where she was making fun of Kamala Harris, but it looked like she was saying it herself, and there was no counter. I never saw a commercial for Winsome Earls. I never saw anything where she was saying anything. So the Republicans ran a really bad campaign, and Spanberger should have been easy to beat, but that's the case with so many of these candidates. But I mean, the guy, Youngkin, he wasn't my favorite candidate, but he was effective, and he was able to do it. And even if they could just run guys like that, they should be able to win. Because how did he win in this Northern Virginia? I don't know.
I think he danced the dance. And remember now, as I pointed out, he got 99 House candidates behind him, and I think in my piece, he only won by 65 or so thousand votes out of 3 million.
Mhm.
That was a close call.
Yeah.
And that's how it has to be if you're fighting some kind of fraud from the other side, which I know that they are. And in the sign wars up around here, uh, Spanberger had hardly any signs. Even when I saw you the last time before the election, driving up through Fairfax County,
Mhm.
where you would normally see a bunch of them, I didn't see
Mhm.
hardly enough to make me think that
Mhm.
she was going to win that. But
Unfortunately, it's become so the days of and that's why again Youngkin winning is pretty unusual considering the way Fairfax County, Northern Virginia is at this point, Loudoun County and everything. But um, I was thinking the other day, and you probably know about this, because we once had George Allen, who I think you mentioned and you guys got to watch the interview he did with Victor Hugo Vaca, who's been on my show several times, and it's definitely a fascinating character. Nothing else, he's entertaining, and he likes me, I like him, but he likes Vince now, and Vince was talking a lot of stuff, and you mentioned George Allen, who I remember him being a sports nut, the Redskins coach of the same name, and his son went into politics, gorgeous wife, seemed to have a great career. He was disappointing in most ways, but as you said, he was the last president really to stand up to the president. And to
well, that
talk about how he stood up, that was very unusual.
the last governor, yeah.
Last
So
governor, yeah.
so George wasn't necessarily the kind of guy that bit into the globalist stuff. He did have the impression that jobs should not leave Virginia. And here came the Clintons. The Clintons were pushing the EPA regulations. They were going to say automobiles now have to meet these standards in certain parts of the state. And they would be the equivalent of Washington, D.C. and the suburban Maryland. And they wanted to have the U.S. government built inspection stations in Virginia. And George wouldn't have anything to do with that. And so George said, uh, what are you going to do? I mean, we're just not going to allow them. We have our own emissions inspections right now. And Clinton said, we're going to take your highway funding away, which, oh, by the way, kind of transfers into what Trump has done here and there. No one said that Clinton couldn't do that back then. So it was assumed that that's what was going to happen. And then George turned around and said, well, if you do that, then we're just not going to help you collect your income taxes here in Virginia. That put everything up on, okay, we need to do something. We need to talk. So the art of the deal worked for George Allen at that point. However, what ended up happening, he made a deal. He wanted the jobs of the inspectors to retain here in the workshops, in the garages in Virginia. But we still ended up having to meet these higher standards. So the people didn't really win. It was a compromise. And there's that word, compromise. It's a word that's disgusting.
What happened to George Allen's political career? I had the impression he was bound for a presidential campaign. What happened? He kind of disappeared.
Well, they didn't like him for that. They didn't like him for standing up to the federal government. And when they had the chance to hit him with that little Malacca word, they just chewed and chewed and chewed and chewed until he finally broke. That killed him. And I'm not going to say he was the smartest, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but he had his faith in the American way, the 1.0, as you would call it.
Yeah, I mean, he would look pretty good at this point compared to a lot of, and then he had his successor Gilmore was maybe even better in some ways, and he's the one that really pushed the personal property tax thing, which I was very interested in. And again, that just disappeared for it was I think 5 years it went down, and then what do you know about that? How is that? If you had a referendum on abolishing the property tax, I can't believe that wouldn't pass overwhelmingly pretty much everywhere.
Well, it would pass if you had people in office who really represented you.
Yeah.
So they don't really represent us. They represent themselves. It's just like I talked about with Victor, and I said, George Carlin. You got to
Yeah.
go back to Carlin. It's a club, and we ain't in it.
Yeah, big club win at it. That's for sure. And but what happened to Gilmore? Gilmore disappeared too. I thought maybe he'd have higher aspirations, but
Well, no, he did run for president. He did.
Gilmore did? I don't remember. I
Yeah,
don't remember that.
he put his hat in the ring, but it didn't last very long.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, okay, well,
Uh,
obviously, I just completely forgot about it. But I mean, there's just it's, and I've talked about this before, and obviously I'm sure you're as disappointed with Trump as I am. He just keeps he keeps taking a darker and darker turn. I don't know what he's doing, attacking Marjorie Taylor Greene and calling her a traitor. And then, what are your thoughts on this? It's like, to me, the impression I get, and I think he's Trumpenstein. I think he's an actor, but it's as if somebody has flipped the switch here, and he is now trying to portray himself as these crazy woke Democrats have said he was. This is what he's going to do. It's like he's trying to do that. I mean, that ridiculous comment he made about and that technically he was right. I think under the Constitution, if you refuse to obey the orders of the commander in chief, I guess that's punishable by death. I don't know. You know that, but technically, but was such a stupid thing to say. And now the Republicans are all over him, and everybody's all activated. He should be impeached. Our friend Billy Ray Valentine has been sending messages. This guy's, how upset he is and everything. He kind of served us on a silver platter to him. What do you think of that?
well, the driving force, of course, was that commercial made by those Democrat congressmen and senators, and that was in itself also unusual and unfortunate. Uh, Two wrongs don't make a right. Again, we are in a dangerous place because the Republican Party does not support Trump, and if he understood that, and I'm surprised that he doesn't, then he wouldn't say these things. Maybe if he's trying to get something done in Congress, then they wouldn't hold up the cloture and say that it's a filibuster when it's not a filibuster. It's a rule made in 1917 by Henry Cabot Lodge, a Republican. And they could do away with that and make all kinds of Trump legislation just slip right through because they got the votes. Okay, they've got the votes. But instead, the Republican Party has painted this business of, well, they hate Trump and they just won in New York and New Jersey and Virginia, So this is a stage being set to reverse all of this stuff come the midterms. So it's all fake. It's a fraud.
And again, the Republicans are not MAGA for all its flaws, and I don't agree with all of it, but there was some good stuff in there, and but Trump, and of course, obviously, is the most flawed of all, and I don't think he ever believed any of it. But the MAGA platform, especially the America First thing, that's a winning proposition most places, or should be. How many Trump was a one-man phenomenon. There's so few people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, by the way. People don't know that Trump, of course, never endorsed her the first time she ran. She beat like 8 guys. He never endorses anybody that
Right.
believes in what he says. And but people like her and Massey, I might have got him before that. Matt Gaetz, just a handful of them who's not there now. But this was a one-man. This was a cult of personality, a phenomenon that he didn't bring a bunch of MAGA people in there. The Republicans there, he's got advantages in both houses, and yet they're 90% of them are rhinos, as you say. They don't support him, and if he tries to do anything good, now they'll support him if he keeps doing what he's doing, which is the wrong thing or nothing at all. But if he tries to do anything good, then Lindsey Graham and all of them, suddenly, I can't do that. What are your? I think the Republicans are a dead party at this point. I don't think they offer any alternative. The Democrats, at least as bad as they are, what they're trying to get done. It's basically a lot of evil stuff. I mean, they're telling you what they want. I mean, what they stand for. What do the Republicans stand for? Like, what did that Winsome Earls in Virginia? What did she stand for? I don't know what the Republicans. If you don't put America first in there, if you don't say we can't have foreign visa workers, which of course Trump just reiterated we need more of them. If you don't say that, if you don't say we need to bring American industry back, what is their argument against the Democrats? I don't know what it is.
They don't have one. All they have is whatever they can steer their way. That's a uniparty. I first heard David Knight say that's the left wing and right wing of the same bird.
Yeah.
That's what we're not. We're not being ruled by any dream of 1776. And I've always said that the Constitution was a mess. I agree with George Mason and Patrick Henry and Richard Henry Lee. It was a mess. It shouldn't have passed it.
Well, and that's, I want to get to that because our friend Robin Lee here, our friend Robin Lee, who maybe we'll see next month at the lunch, said, "Have you watched Ken?" I didn't know Ken Burns had a thing about the revolution. I can imagine what it's like. Did he claim that it was some black soldiers that actually led it, or what does Ken Burns say? Have you seen it?
I caught just a few minutes of it the other night when we could get it in. We can't always get in the PBS from out here, but some of it was the truth on one side. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Maybe not half truth. And it's difficult to throw it all on TV because if you read the stuff, just as you were talking about Trump kind of getting out there ahead of everything, and he's doing it himself. He's by himself, and he's dragging this movement behind him. And by the way, and I know Victor agreed with me, the MAGA is Tea Party rebuilt, relabeled, and has a different command and control structure.
Yeah.
So it's really the same stuff, right? Is that what they have?
So Robin says blacks, Indians, and whites fighting. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you saw Ken Burns's, I'm a huge baseball historian, and if you saw his thing on baseball, I mean, half of it was devoted to the Negro Leagues, literally. I mean, it was so ridiculous, and that's Ken. And technically, he's good, but his Civil War documentary was good, technically very good, but it just told one side of the story.
In the Revolution, though. The Indians also fought for the British.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those guys picked whatever side paid, quite frankly. And if you want to go back, as I was saying about Trump getting out there on his own, and this is what I feared even from the beginning. You may remember back when the election took place, I was afraid that he was going to become another Nathaniel Bacon. And for those who don't know of Bacon,
yes, talk about Bacon. I was so because and you brought back memories when I was listening to you talk about it. I had blocked it out of my memory. I remember it's one of the reasons I knew I was a populist because Bacon was a real populist, and I remember how hearing the story of Bacon's rebellion as a little kid, I remember being stirred.
You were lucky to hear it as a kid because by the time I was a kid. A few years later, that was gone. Let me just flash the name of this book up there.
Road to Revolution.
Okay. And it's by a guy named Warner. That's a long name. So this fellow was he was charged by the Colonial Williamsburg people to get out there and research for the Colonial Williamsburg tour guides. And he came up with this book. And the reason why they went to the Bacon Revolution was because there was so little information about it. So they set this guy off, and he's checking all the churches and all the courthouses up and down the Potomac River and up and down the bay. And there's nothing there. There's nothing there because all of the wars through the years had burned it all down or lost all those records. Stuff was gone. So this is why I think this guy Warner was a brilliant researcher. He decides to see if the records are still available in London for the Virginia Company, the people who owned Virginia. And they had an Office of Correspondence archive, the whole thing from beginning to end. And sure enough, he found all kinds of stuff. And that's what's in the book. It's all source material. He has just literally copies of letters back and forth from the company to the people there in Virginia, and even from the people who were supporting Bacon. So Bacon comes to Virginia in 1674, something like that. He comes from England. He's not doing well financially. He thinks, well, maybe in the New World I can get it better. Do something in Virginia. He gets down there and finds out that this Governor Berkeley, which, by the way, is what Berkeley, West Virginia is named after, but back then it was Virginia, okay? So that's how it got the name. So Berkeley, he finds out, is paying Indians to go out and raid small farmers who had just cleared the land and just getting their small farms and whatever put up. They raid them, kill them, force them off the land, and Berkeley's very wealthy friends go out and take this property on their own. So that's their payment, and they keep him in business. They keep Berkeley in business. So he just Bacon decides he's going to go ahead and break this whole game up, and he gets people around him, around that area, Tappahannock down to Williamsburg. Okay, he gets people together and said, "We need to stop this," and so they arm up into a militia, and they go down to Williamsburg and they force Berkeley out of the mansion. Get out, take your people with you. And at that time, he had what's called Bacon's Laws. That's probably what you remember. And one of them was that he outlawed slavery and indentured servitude.
Right.
And so he's the first guy with that kind of power to say, it's over. And they loved him so much, they even formed their own militia. So he returns back to Tappahannock to home.
Now, he was a governor. What was his title?
Well, he didn't even have a title yet.
Okay.
That's how fast things took place.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't even really put a whole government structure together. The governor was gone. Here's the laws. We'll be back to start this whole thing up. So he goes back home to rest, and he dies mysteriously. Yeah. Probably murdered, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So he's the head of this movement, and he's the only guy, just like Trump is the only guy. So when they find out that he's dead, Berkeley gets his people together. They go back to all of those supporters, and they burn them, kill them, or chase them into the wilderness. And the last people that Berkeley's army fought were the slaves and the indentured servants. And all that's in that book. And when I'm reading this book, he also just happens to pass on this information about guess who was the guy in charge at the Virginia ownership office. His name was John Locke. One and the same, John Locke. Yeah. Because I watch people. I just watch them sometimes, and they give these great history lessons about all of the sociology and the socialism and the old evil people, and they'll throw John Locke in there from left field, and you really don't know where John Locke comes from. No one talks about that. Who is this John Locke guy? Well, he's the guy that watched the very first revolution on these shores, and he watched it through the correspondence of people, and that's how he got his opinion on property and freedom. That's where it came from. That in itself is a great discovery, but that book was published in 1961.
And obviously a tremendous influence on Jefferson and the other founders as well.
At Jefferson and George Mason and George Wythe, all those guys knew this story. And they knew that if they were going to break from England, they can't just sit there and put one guy out front. Because the same thing would happen to them. So George Mason started to get the committees of correspondence together. And then he actually drafted, I forget how many. I know he drafted Fairfax, Prince William, and Stafford, and maybe Orange, which is interesting because that's where Madison was. So he was doing even Culpeper, I think. So you can see his works with all of those different counties at the time. They knew they had to look like a unified body of people with representation to come forward. Now, that's why I wrote The Public Wheel and You, because that was their approach. It's the only one that's ever held. And I think we need to get people back into understanding how to do this, because we don't know really who's running this country anymore. How many directions have you seen now? What from this religion and that country and this banking institution and the World Economic Forum? What the hell are we supposed to do? And I think dancing with the devil every day when it comes to the news as it's coming in is a big mistake. All we have to do is acknowledge that we're done, get back to reading on this material, and then get out and get in front of people, talk to them, show them. My God, everybody has seen the price of food. I remember when I talked to Billy Ray last time, the price of food is one of those things that you can get everybody connected with. And now they're taking away all of the land for data centers. Yeah. All of that land out there. I think my wife told me that she saw a commercial today about some guy who's a farmer in Iowa saying, well, things are turning down and we're not growing as much. Well, there's a lot of reasons why, like stratospheric aerosol injection, killing the land, killing the water. No one wants to stop that. That's like the United Nations wants to push all these people into the United States because they say that our birth rate's down. Well, how about working on the birth rate? We don't need these jerks from the third world.
Well, that's what Russia and Hungary, that's why they're being demonized. Those countries, they're paying their citizens to have babies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I told Victor the other night, I said, the United States seems to me to be making the same moves that Nazi Germany made, especially when it comes to the military. So the Russians are doing what we did in World War II, build a lot of something simple and just overcome your enemy with the numbers. Whereas we find out that we have all these missiles that cost so darn much. And you can't make but what, 2 or 3 a month? That sounds to me like the Tiger tank.
It's misplaced priorities, obviously. Rhonda Tate, I agree with you. Vince should have been a history teacher. I would have loved to have been. I just want to address a couple of. Teresa asks, it's Berkeley, West Virginia, right? She's Berkeley or Beckley.
It's Berkeley, and it was Virginia when it was named Berkeley.
Yeah.
But then
Berkeley, West Virginia.
The Civil War came along and they split off, so it became West Virginia.
Which is an odd thing, since they were Lincoln was waging the war because he didn't want the southern states to secede, but essentially part of Virginia became West Virginia. But so it's kind of a strange thing. And a couple questions from Phil the Kill and BJ Chang about my sports book. I am still working on my sports book. Yes, it's going slower because I've been dealing with the family thing with my sister and my niece. This summer's been taking up a lot of my time. I've been visiting rehab centers and stuff, but it's going slowly but surely. It's getting there, and it's going to be my most controversial book, and it's difficult because the search engines block everything you want to find, and so I'm having to go. I'm having to, and you do that. They do that for everything, but if you say something like, Francis Bacon, Nathaniel Bacon is someone that everybody should know about, and I wrote about Daniel Shays, who I kind of liken him to that. I mean, Shays is another guy that was a populist. I think it was Gore Vidal who called Daniel Shays the first populist, whereas another guy just a fed up Continental Army soldier who didn't get paid. And I talk about it in Crimes and Cover-Ups, my book. These are people, and then of course the Whiskey Rebellion, which I know George Washington's not your favorite, and I hold that against him as well, because he came down on these people. Talk a little bit, because I mean
Did you say the Whiskey Rebellion?
Well, yeah, the Shays Rebellion and then the Whiskey Rebellion, both they kind of, I think, were symptomatic of how already things were kind of going in the wrong direction.
In Pennsylvania, and I've talked about Pennsylvania before, it's a very critical and what's the word for it? It's like an Achilles heel between the North and the South. I heard Matt Bracken the other day say about how people who had the right to vote had to own land. Well, it's sort of kind of true here in Virginia. It was you had to have land, you had to have a plantation, or you had to own a home in the towns or the cities, or you had to have been a military veteran of rank. So that's how George Washington got in. So, sorry about that. Anyway, where was I? Where did I lost my thought? I'm getting old.
Washington's reaction to the Whiskey Rebellion,
Oh, the
especially.
whiskey. Yeah, all right. So here's Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania comes along and really liberally gives people the right to vote. And that shocked an awful lot of folks. And I know that shocked people like John Adams and Colonel McKeon, who I also put in my book on May the 10th, 1776, gave a resolution out of the Continental Congress to give the people of Pennsylvania who wanted to have a provisional government and declare themselves free and ready to leave England the chance to do so. That was May the 10th, 1776. And that's because the people of the Penn family who had been controlling, sorry, looking like a stupid cat. Anyway, the people of the Penn family had been controlling Pennsylvania. So for those of you who watched the movie 1776 and you see John Dickinson putting up a big fight about separating from England, that's because he was fronted by those people from the Penn family. And then the people from the western part of the state, specifically around Carlisle, said, okay, well, we're going to just start this new provisional government. And they signaled to the Continental Congress, we're in charge of Pennsylvania and we want to go. So off they went. And John Adams, I swear he probably never thought he'd see the day that they would give everybody the right to vote, basically, in Pennsylvania. So along comes Colonel McKeon. McKeon had been president of the Continental Congress twice, and he also served on the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. So he did a lot of living right there in Pennsylvania Hall, up here in Philadelphia, even though I think he was from Delaware, But so here comes the new Constitution. And there had been two reporters from two separate newspapers in Pennsylvania who written bad things about McKeon. And he didn't like what they wrote about them. The first guy he charged with, I forget the crime, and that guy got off. He actually got out of it. But the second guy, he puts in prison. And this was right after the Constitution had been ratified, but without those amendments, specifically the first one, of freedom of speech. So here comes, I know people have disagreed with me on this before, but this is how it worked. They decide, the Congress decides it wants to tax these whiskey makers out in Western Pennsylvania, a special whiskey tax. And they got really ticked off, and they said, we didn't go through this revolution for this. We're not going to do that. In fact, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is really kind of the center of all of that, the people there in Carlisle overwhelmingly turned down the Constitution. There were only like a handful of people in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, who actually voted for ratification. And a lot of those people were whiskey growers, or whiskey makers, I mean. So they were growing corn and making the whiskey, and that was their stock in trade. So they refused to do it, and they tarred and feathered some inspectors and people who were going to collect the tax. So obviously, tar and feathering.
Tar and feathering.
Right. So that signaled that they were ready to have their own revolution again. And next thing you know, Washington is talked into going up there and arresting these people and dragging them back. He doesn't like the feel. He doesn't like the sound of it. So he gets Alexander Hamilton to do it. And Alexander Hamilton says, I'm not the guy for this job. What you need is someone who has military experience. And so he goes right to one of the lead anti-federalists, Richard Henry Lee. And Washington puts him in charge. And Lee really doesn't do much with it. I think they dragged a few guys to Philadelphia, which is where the head of the country was. That's where the capital was at the time, and they let him go. They let him go. So here in the very beginning, the Anti-Federalists were correct that this Constitution would give these guys ultimate power. And not surprisingly, within 2 years, those amendments were passed. 10 of the 12 were passed.
Well, let's talk about how, because these and my favorites tend to be all on the anti-federalist side. Patrick Henry, George Mason, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, and these are the guys, with the exception of Jefferson. They were all kind of frozen out. Now, Patrick Henry was much older. I don't know if he would have been maybe too old to serve, but it seems like they didn't have a place in the administrations. When the country began under the Constitution, other than Jefferson and Thomas Paine. I talked about him in my book. Very bitter at George Washington. Wrote a excoriating poem at him and everything. He was not welcome. Jefferson famously brought him back to the White House amid much criticism because he thought he was a great man. But they had lost the battle, and the battle explained what happened under the Articles of Confederation, which looked better and better, in retrospect. This is the way we governed for how many years after we won the war for independence. And what compelled the Constitution? What were the forces doing that? And what was the battle between the people that wanted to keep the Articles of Confederation and those who wanted the Constitution?
Well, the way I view the way that the Constitution came about, of course, was let's say you have the Levins of the world who say that, well, the currency was bad and there weren't a lot of representatives from the states interested in showing up all the time to the Continental Congress and so forth and so on. And the Articles of Confederation were really, even Jefferson didn't think that was going to work. If you read the notes of the Continental Congress Journal from 1776 into 1777, he says, I don't think this is going to work. And there's a lot of people here who don't think this overall government's going to work. So I think the push actually came from the very wealthy. If you notice that they allowed the Articles of Confederation to last as long as the war did, and right after the war, then they decided that there was this problem that needed to be fixed. And that generally came from the people who had money and they were still intact, their fortunes were still intact. Although George Mason himself was wealthy, he was not one of these guys that believed in this. He had a family, and he knew he had to pass down things to people. And things just couldn't stay frozen. For instance, there was a slave. This was after we became a nation. There was a slave named Kit who had turned in a bunch of, what do you call them, counterfeiters. And they were counterfeiting continental dollars, making them worth even less than they were. Okay. So this slave turns him in. And even though as an anti-federalist, he lost the case of stopping that Constitution, he still went forward and tried to design a way to end the slavery. He gets the Virginia government to pass a bill that will pay his owner off and set this guy free. So that's how hard the guy had to work to stop slavery. And I know he had slaves, but he was ready to pull the plug on it, as was Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
And I think Richard Henry Lee was the same. I don't think Patrick Henry enjoyed keeping slaves. So that's why these guys were anti-federalists. They really wanted to stop the whole thing then and there. And
Jefferson had a very anti-slavery clause in the Declaration of Independence that they removed.
And they
talked
forced,
about how,
they forced him to cut it out. I could almost probably recite the dialogue from the movie.
Yeah,
I can. Yeah, I would someday.
Well, I love the fact that because I talked so much before about how Americans know so little about their founding, and I was fortunate. I guess they were still teaching this stuff in school because history was my favorite subject, and I loved it. I mean, I became a civil libertarian the moment I heard Patrick Henry's. I may disagree with what you say, but I'll defend to my dying day the right to say it, which was he shared from Voltaire. But that stirred something in me, and that's what I said. Nathaniel Bacon was the same kind of thing. These people that were Daniel Shea, these people were fighting great powers, and there were populist kinds of things like freeing the slaves and the indentured servants. I mean,
Yes.
that's populism there, and unfortunately, it went the wrong way. And obviously, the Federalists won the battle with Alexander Hamilton had George Washington's ear, and we went that way. And somebody, there's a question there for you. I'm gonna put the link out there too. Um, BJ Chang says, "What is Vince's opinion on Shelby Foote's Civil War writing?" He had a great voice. I'll give him that.
I have not read all of Shelby's work, but that is considered to be one of the how would you say, that's one of the leading lights covering the Confederacy. So,
and if you watch Ken Burns's Civil War, the best part of it is when Shelby Foote talks. I mean, he's got a great voice. He really does. I don't know much about his writing, but I'm going to put the link out here. And anybody want to talk live with Vince Agnelli? Many of you know him or know of him.
And I did remember, and I think I sent you this information before. I was going to try to find.
Here you go. The link's out there. So
the locations of where the Mason and his descendants had lived, because I thought I might be able to track down places where his papers may be, because all of his papers were discovered to have been disappeared after his death. And I think sorry.
Go ahead. You think
Well, I think his widow was told by Thomas Jefferson to get rid of them, send them someplace, because he had.
Where do you have somebody? People want to talk. Do people want to talk to Vince Agnelli? Let's say Whitby Bear. Good to see you. How you doing, Whitby? You're in the chat.
I'm good. I'm listening to your friend there.
Yeah.
That's a great dog. What kind of dog is that?
Oh, unfortunately, it's not around anymore. It's an American Bulldog.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Hold on. I need to turn off my YouTube. There we go. Now I can hear you clearly.
What do you want to talk about, Whitby?
So I've been doing a deep dive into the Constitution. Unfortunately, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which probably don't even apply to Caucasian Americans at the time. And that's where we got in trouble. Is that the Civil War? I don't think the Civil War is about slavery at all. And that's a lie. And it was all about turning the private slaves into public slaves, because we're all public slaves. It's voluntary servitude. They did not outlaw voluntary servitude, just involuntary servitude.
No, but in the Lincoln, in his executive order, which is what that was an executive order that only freed the black slaves. He didn't.
Yeah,
he didn't free any.
Only in the states that were under rebellion.
Only in the South. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. He picked and choose.
So I don't know if you know this, Woodley, but the Karl Marx at the time was he was a syndicated columnist, and he was writing in New York, and his writings got the Irish to rebel in that draft riot. Did you know that?
Well, they were just pulling them right off the ship and giving them a gun, saying like, "Welcome to America. Go shooting the Southerners."
Yeah.
Well, he was writing. That's how he became very popular in New York City. Yeah.
Well, like I said, we traded we the people to we the persons. Once we became U.S. citizens and we become persons, we became, basically a corporate entity. We're chattel property under a feudal system. Mm-hmm. You don't have a Bill of Rights. You have privileges and immunities.
Yep. I'll put this to you, that the political parties are actually recreations of the freeholders and freemen groups from before the country was even formed. They hide.
Are you talking about the current Democrat and Republican Party? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's right. When they put them together, and if you go back and read Common Sense with Thomas Paine, he curses the parliament and the parties. May they never be seen again. So when we started this country, we didn't have these parties because they weren't the idea of representing each people. And I think the original Constitution shows, what is it, 30,000 people per representative, something like that, if I remember correctly, in Article 1.
Okay.
We have one person representing 1 million people. There's something very that. And that one person belongs to a party that we don't. It's just George Carlin. We're not part of it. So this whole thing operates above us now. And we're, as you say, we're the chattel, and we are to be, our essence is to be scooped out and worn down. And if they run us into these little bitty cities, well, that's fine. They don't care.
Well, the thing is that, like I said, before they instituted the 14th Amendment, they put in that clause, that you can, how do you say it? You revoke your citizenship. You can not be a U.S. citizen, because that's where they get you. Because the United States was only 10 square miles. Everybody outside of that was a citizen of the state. And you ever hear a governor or a mayor ever talk about the citizens of, let's say, South Carolina or North Dakota? They don't. They call you residents. Because as a resident, you're a U.S. citizen. You're just residing in the state because you're U.S. property, basically.
Well, I think if you read my book, Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776, 1963, I go over all this stuff in detail, and I give people the real look at Lincoln, who was the greatest tyrant we've ever had. And
I agree.
We lost so much at the end of the Civil War, because prior to the war between the states, the United States were referred to in a plural way. You'd say the United States are. After the words, ever since then, it's the United States is. It's one entity. And you're exactly right. You say citizens of North Carolina. Nobody really talks about the citizens of Virginia. I mean, you're a Virginia resident, they may say, but nobody talks about that because states' rights were obliterated by that.
Yes.
And they've never returned.
Yeah.
That Strom Thurmond, 1948, that came up with the state rights. I think they might have won a few electoral votes, but that's it. I mean, the states' rights, especially died with the Civil Rights Movement. That was it. Now it's considered racist to talk about states' rights.
I have a friend of mine you might want to interview. No offense to your guest, but I have a friend that I'd like to have you interview potentially.
Sure.
He's who taught me everything I know. And what I know now is that basically everything's based upon presumption. It's voluntary. You can get yourself out of it. Right. But it takes a lot of you have to rebut all the presumptions, because you're considered an infant under administrative, under administration.
Well, just email. If you have my email, it's author as in writer, authorjeffries@gmail.com. Just email the information.
Is it anywhere in this YouTube? On your?
It's not here, but you can find out everything. You can find out how to contact me on. I'm on X, Facebook, or you can message me there or something. But and let me know what guest you're talking about.
Facebook. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I'll let you guys get back to the conversation, but I know now that you can remove yourself from this, and it's just a matter of putting a living will on the record and then standing upon that will, and putting a performance contract on it as well.
Appreciate the call, Whitby. Thanks very so much, and get in touch with
me. You're right. I'll get with you.
Okay, take care, brother. We got RV Ham here now. My friend from the Great White North, driving his truck, the world's most tenacious.
I'm not actually.
Oh, you're not driving your truck. Okay, I thought you were.
In my car, I got off work last night.
You're in the vehicle, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in my car. My wife is in the drugstore.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Don, for mentioning that. Yeah, my name is Richard Brent Winteringham, otherwise known as RB Ham, and I just got back from the dentist, so my lip isn't moving so well. But I have a podcast on Rumble, Facebook, and you can also watch through Twitter X. It's called Beyond the Pale. And I had a couple guests on that have talked about this before, about how the original idea of the American independence and stuff was basically never allowed to actually take shape the way the founders intended, like almost right from the beginning. There was a poison pill passed into there. And a lot of people talk about the main driver of American independence may have actually been land speculation and stuff, because the British government had made a proclamation that any land west of the Appalachians was supposed to be reserved for at least for a while for the Indian people, because they didn't want an Indian war. Mm-hmm. And that kind of drove land speculators and people who were English settlers in the colonies. That was really an impetus towards fighting against the British government, because they wanted to grab that land. So I'd like to know if Vince could talk about that for a bit, because I found that very interesting.
Well, the Indians and the French ended up having a war with us anyway.
Yeah, that's right.
So over the same stretch of land. So when Napoleon came along and he decided he wanted to get back at the British, he sold us that Louisiana Purchase. He basically gave it away. And if you go back and read in Thomas Jefferson's papers when he was president, he actually asked the Congress to go ahead and incorporate a stretch of what's now Michigan to bring these people in. And they had a leader by the name of Pontiac. And he had been an Indian who was slaughtered by another tribe. So these guys were killing themselves anyway. It's not like we went up there and took land that we just wanted to eyeball and take. They actually offered to join the United States. So as far as the British holding that land aside, they only had land out to a certain point. And then that was all, to have to deal with the French.
Yeah, I kind of read about that, and it was only a pause. They probably had plans in the future to go after it, but it was just a pause because they were overstretched as the British. Because at that time, a lot of people don't realize that the War of Independence was kind of folded into a world war between the French, the English, the Spanish, fighting over territories in India and Africa, and of course in the Caribbean. I mean, people have to realize that the British probably had no chance of ever winning the American the War of Independence because they were so overstretched.
Yeah, but like typical egotistical people that they are.
Yeah, well, the empire, all empires end like that, and you can almost draw kind of a parallel to what's going on with the United States right now. Mm-hmm. Because after World War II, we kind of took over the British, took over the empire from the British, right? So it became the American Empire. Now we, or not we, I'm a Canadian, but the American Empire is now finding what it means to be overstretched and have its resources overstretched. I mean, how many military bases can you actually afford to keep going? And now we're going to hear that we want to build another one in Damascus, Syria, and another one on the border of Gaza. It's crazy.
Who else is going to stop these Venezuelan fishermen boat? Come on, man. We've got these boats are dangerous. We're going to do something about it.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about the Marshall Plan.
Right.
And George Marshall, his middle name was C, stands for Catlett. And that's because his distant cousin was John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And John Marshall was born in Catlett. Okay. And General Marshall decided that he had to give this speech to Harvard about how to bring the former enemies back to life so that they wouldn't turn around and be enemies again, like what would happen after World War I. Unfortunately, that plan never had an end. And I don't know who in Congress put it together, but all of that came from a lousy speech to Harvard. And here we are still paying for it. And are you guys in Canada?
Yeah, I live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Yeah, and it was because I'm thinking, how are the American people going to stand for this? Because with all these foreign wars that are never seem to be ending, and even if Trump promised to end the one in Ukraine, and he promised to do this and he promised to do that, as soon as he got into office, he went to drain the swamp, and the swamp seems to have drained him, and it just keeps going apace. And the American people, you have homeless veterans in the streets, you have people living paycheck to paycheck, and meanwhile, all these billions of dollars are flowing out the door, propping up foreign governments, foreign adventurism and stuff. At some point, I mean, at what point does just printing money out of thin air actually start to backfire on you? Or is that just the point? Is it all theater? Is it just you can print as much money as you want, but you just convince the people that we're broke anyway?
Somebody asked me the other day about when will it, eventually financially come to an end. And I told them, I said, you'd be surprised how far they can fractionalize something that really doesn't exist, like a currency.
So that's what I wonder. Is this just a psychological operation to convince us that such thing as deficits actually matter? Because remember, Dick Cheney famously said that Ronald Reagan proved that deficits don't matter when he started when they started talking about the Iraq War.
Well, look at so we were talking about property taxes earlier, and whenever property taxes, they always tie them to schools. And so the public is dumb enough to believe that if we didn't have personal property taxes, we couldn't fund the schools. But nobody said, okay, well, first of all, why are they tied to personal property taxes? And where do you get the money? Let's say Ukraine needs another 100 billion. That's not part of the continuing resolution. I don't think that's not in our budget. But why don't we need to raise taxes for that? It just goes there. It's there automatically. Israel needs another handout. It's there. Automatic. Whenever they need something for one of their wars or adventurism, it's there. But for something that might benefit the people, like fixing the roads, something like that. Oh no, we're gonna have to raise the gas tax. Where are you gonna get the money for that? People don't question this stuff, and you're exactly right. The debt can be repudiated. It's phony to begin with. We should just say it's not our debt. Why should the American taxpayers pick up debt for debt to China or anything else? We had nothing to do with that. It's irresponsibility. It's like if you had a family member, you wouldn't have to assume their debt. Say that's your problem. Why did you do that? So, but nobody talks that way. And as you have the conservatives again, they don't offer any alternative. Well, what are you going to do? The debt is growing. It's incomprehensible. And it's phony.
Yeah, the American people are on the hook for the debt, but there's never any problems sending all that money off to African nations or Israel or
anyway,
it's crazy.
And the congressional pay raises are never held back. When they need a pay raise, they find the money for that somehow. They voted into. I mean, we need populism so bad, but you can see what we're talking about is that we've lost every time. You can say we won when we created America and the noble ideals and all that. The Declaration of Independence is still stirring. It's a timeless document, but you could see the infighting there at the beginning of the country, and you had people like Thomas Paine, whose common sense, he was phased out. As I point out in my book, Crimes and Cover-Ups, nobody even knows where Thomas Paine is buried. They lost his body, or so. Nobody knows where he is. He had no family, so he had no ancestors. That guy's gone. You have George Mason, who's he has a university here, very close to me, that had a Cinderella basketball team a while back, but I'm sure they pay no homage at all to his beliefs. So that's about the only extent that people know about him. And Patrick Henry, people still know the "Give me liberty, give me death" stuff. But
and John, you'll notice in popular culture who got a musical named after him, Alexander Hamilton, who probably did more to damage the idea of.
Yes, his side won, and that side won. He did. Vince talked about John Marshall again. Invented judicial review, which is the problem today. There's no balance of powers. It hasn't been since John Marshall, and Jefferson was all upset at that. He was said, "You can't do this. This is not what we intended." He lost. Marshall won, and now the Republicans, Democrats, nobody except me, I think, is talking about judicial review. It's stupid, but the Republicans say, "Well, we're going to try to get this in court," and maybe we'll get a federal judge that was appointed by Trump to rule on it. That's not the way it's supposed to work. Where some one judge decides if something's constitutional, but that's the system that we have now, thanks to the wrong guys winning.
Well,
Yeah, it's too bad. Go ahead. Go ahead,
well,
Vince.
there in the Constitution, it's in Article 3, it says that those lower courts are inferior. So that's the quote. So they are inferior. And Marbury versus Madison, I believe, was a setup by James Madison himself. Because Madison, of course, being a Federalist, and so was Marshall, they knew that Jefferson was not necessarily a full believer. He ended up saying, okay, I'm supporting the new Constitution. But initially, he really didn't. And they kind of wanted to make sure he was going to get put in his place.
Well, they had to put the Bill of Rights in, that's,
But see, Marbury versus Madison goes around that. And in the U.S. Constitution, it says ex post facto. You can't make ex post facto law several times. And that upset George Mason. Those words meant that something that was legal before cannot have a new law made against it out of that Constitution later on. I'm not saying that George Mason didn't believe that we had the right to have free speech or firearms or freedom of religion, because he did. But he was going to say that you shouldn't lock things up like this. Instead, you should have a Bill of Rights. And that was his initial push against the Constitution that had no Bill of Rights, like the Declaration of Rights in Virginia. So along comes Marbury versus Madison. That ends up becoming settled law. And Jefferson should have put his foot down on that. But instead, it does kind of lay a reverse problem for Trump, where the people who are against Trump, as Trump says, you're going to have no government agency because there's no money for it. So that's what Marbury versus Madison was all about, is that there was money laid aside, and the guy was approved by Congress to be a judge. So they said, this guy has to be the judge because Congress approved it and they have the money for it, and there it is. But now that there's no money for some of these other things in this clean, crisp little CR, those agencies like USAID that are closed are going to stay closed because of that, because he has that reverse power. Then it comes like this Virginia election, and I point out that the Republicans have been screwing us for 15 years anyway, maybe longer. The next big case was Martin versus Hunter's lessee. And that's where Justice Story steps in and says, the U.S. Supreme Court has the right to go down into the lower courts of the states and to any case at all and decide what goes on there. And that case actually went back and forth between the Virginia Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court, where the Virginia state court said, you don't have this power. And the Supreme Court kept saying, it says the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, so-called supremacy clause. And there it stands. So when I say the Department of Justice should come into Virginia and start looking at this stuff according to their processes, they have the right and the power to do so. But we don't see anybody helping us out. So it's a two-faced system. It was no good from the start. That's my position about it. Your previous video caller was, I think, making the point coming around about the property taxes and that we are slaves. You don't ever get to own anything in the United States. You don't get to own land here. You are going to pay taxes and insurance. So not only
you have the law of the eminent domain too, that they can always,
they can always come and take it, and they do, especially if you've got power lines that they need to put in for data centers. God help you, and if you guys are going through that.
Oh yeah, well we're going through. It's worse here. If the federal government decides that they need access to your land for any reason, water, mineral rights, they can just write a law up and come take it. It's really bad. And I was going to mention about the Supreme Court. I was always curious about one thing: Supreme Court judges being appointed for life. I always found that a little bit odd, and especially if you have two parties, right, trying to pack it for their benefit.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that that could ever be overturned and they could be elected? It could be an elective position, say for 10, 12 years at the most, and then they'd have to stand for election. I mean, that always surprised me. If they're three co-equal branches of the government, shouldn't they all be elective?
Well, first of all, talking about the co-equal branch business, I have no idea where that started, because Federalist number 10, and according to Madison and Hamilton, say that the judiciary is the weakest branch of all. So I don't know where this business of a co-equal. I mean, I'm just saying that always has boggled my mind where people come up with that. But the business of, is there going to be a term limit? The only way that I know you can get that in is to have an amendment to the Constitution. And as you said, there's two parties, and brother, they're not going to let that happen.
I guess not.
Oh no.
You have to amend the Constitution. You could amend the Constitution to outlaw political parties, couldn't you?
Well, what would we do? Can you imagine that?
It could be done, but they won't do it. But I don't think people really understand just how bad this is, especially here in Virginia, basically the home of the United States of America. This is where it was born. So,
and theoretically, the legislative branch is our only hope, theoretically, because we can overturn the House every 2 years there, but we vote 96% of them back in, assuming we really vote.
yes.
But the legislative branch is so weak now that they haven't declared war since World War II. And how many times have troops been sent? I mean, that's how bad they are. Yes. They won't do anything. And the judiciary, federal judges ruling everything under judicial review. And then you have imperial presidents with executive orders and doing what they want. The legislature just sits there and does nothing.
And you have, I see this polling that, they poll how popular people in Congress are. Like, Congress is like one of the least popular institutions in the United States. 20% approval rating, but they have these 90% incumbency. Like, how does that happen?
Well, that happens, number one, because no term limits. And number two, because these parties act like they're special groups. They're the only ones that have the right to vote. So if you come here to, say, Virginia, and you want to go to your local Republican Party office, they have only a certain number of seats that they'll allow people to sit in. And if you try to go over that number of seats, unless they internally say we can have more than 30 seats, you can't come in the door. You can't come in. So the way the Tea Party stuff started was those Republicans who were older Reaganite Republicans knew the story. They knew that if you got enough people in the door ahead of time, that they could take over that party meeting, and then that party meeting, they would sit there and push certain people for candidacy. And that was that. That was like, it's almost like Saul Alinsky fighting them with their own rules. And there's a lot of Saul Alinsky that gets used on both sides. I've written about that too on my Substack. So there's a lot of that stuff that goes on. And when you talk about that to a Republican, they go, it's like talking to the mafia. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, look how big term limits were in the 90s, and the Republicans, Newt Gingrich and all that, they all pushed it, and they never got it. You had people that ran. Remember when Rostenkowski and really entrenched people were beaten by term limits Republicans? As soon as they got in there, and suddenly they weren't for term limits anymore. Right. And so we couldn't even get something like that. I mean, that's a baby step.
That's the other thing, is that they make these promises, you believe them, they go in, they renege on their promises, and then the next guy comes along and makes promises. And when are you keep getting fooled again over and over? Here in Canada, we have this horrible first past the post parliamentary system. And way back about 15 years ago, when Justin Trudeau first started running for prime minister, he said, when I get in there, I will have proportional representation and all this stuff. But as soon as he got in there, as soon as he won, of course, I can't do proportional representation after all. Sorry, guys. It's like every time, and Obama made all those promises and reneged on them. Trump's made all the promises and reneged on them. But and it's like the American people just keep getting, and any population of citizens, we keep getting fooled over and over again. But again, it's always meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And how do you ever get past that? I don't know.
I've got a perfect example for you here that it's not right in front of me. I'd written it down, but I remember a lot of times when I've been in front of these groups of people to talk about starting over locally, I run into the gun guys, the 2A guys. And they always say, oh, well, the Republicans are our best bet to keep all they want is your money. That's all they want is your money. And just recently, I saw on YouTube some guy, well, the first guy was a real kook. He said he's a lawyer. Another guy turned in this report that said, HR 404, the Hearing Protection Act. You may have heard of that. RB, I don't know if you've ever heard of that down here. It's a bill to allow silencers to come through as regular pieces of a firearm. In other words, you don't have to have the big tax stamp. You don't have to put your name into the FBI and all that other crap. So that's 404. Hearing. So this report said that this thing has already gone through the House and it's waiting on the Senate. So, okay. So I got to look it up, right? Well, guess what? It was introduced into the House on the 15th of January this year, and there it sits in 2 committees. It didn't go out of. It's not even gotten out of committee. They won't even let it come to a vote. And the Senate has their own version of it. I think it's SB 613 or something like that. And then there was another one that some guy had put in for protection of hearing. So these people who think that the Republicans are protecting their Second Amendment right, they're fooled. I hate to tell them. You're going to lose. Now some of them want to move to West Virginia, where they don't know that West Virginia says it has the right to stick you with whatever fluid that they've got.
Oh, it's just terrible. And it's just like the Epstein files. Finally, they're released from the House of Representatives. It's going to the Senate, right? There's going to be all kinds of impediments there thrown up.
And there goes Johnson. Johnson goes running over to the Senate and says, you've got to redact all these names for national security. Okay, well, what the hell has everybody been talking about that this guy Epstein is running this system to gather intelligence? Yeah, it's true. Why not show it to us? The stock market's not going to crash. What the hell?
I was disappointed. Even Thomas Massey is my favorite politician, but I'm hoping that he just somehow it was slipped in without his knowledge. But in the bill, it specifically says the release of unclassified information, which I don't like that word in there because that gives them out. And I hope he didn't know. I don't know. Maybe they're all bad.
That's proof, Don. Yeah. That's proof that this whole thing was a security breach. I understand. I saw a little piece of this guy Pollard. They let this guy Pollard out, and he's talking about how.
Yeah, and Huckabee went and met with them supposedly against the CIA. The CIA has come out and said we're all upset about that, but you're trying to tell me that the CIA didn't know that happened? Come on.
And they want to execute Snowden, and they're meeting with Snowden.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's unbelievable.
So, RB, what do you think? How many provinces in Canada are going to try to break free? Do you think it's going to really happen?
Well, there's always something that gets in the way. Right now, of course, Alberta there's a big thing with Alberta sovereignty. This is the province next to us. Saskatchewan here too. We have a whole bunch of patriots here that want to break away from Canada, especially after what happened during COVID and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But the problem is there's just too many normies out there, and Donald knows what I'm talking about. These people that go through life as non-playing characters, NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
Half of them just don't care, and the other half are so busy because they're working 2-3 jobs just to make ends meet. They're living paycheck to paycheck. We have the same problem here in Canada. We're priced out of our own. Like, the housing prices are ridiculous. Kids growing up nowadays have no chance ever owning their own home. They're constantly being bombarded by propaganda left and right, saying that this is just the way it's got to be, and there's a big deficit, and you know, and having people on the left and having people on the right fighting against each other all the time through the media, making up these, these culture war tropes, that they're constantly fighting over these things. They never have a chance to really breathe and take a look and look up and see what's going on. We were way better off back in the 50s and 60s when and people call it the greatest generation, the boomers and all that stuff, back in the 50s and 60s, when the unions were strong, people were making good money and good livings, and they had time for creature comforts. They had time to take time off and raise families. One person could work and the other person could stay at home and take care of the kids. And I think that is what they assaulted after the Vietnam War, when the middle class in America decided enough is enough. And they got and it wasn't the hippies in the summer of love that ended the Vietnam War. It was middle class moms and dads who were sick and tired of having their kids being sent off to a war for no purpose. And I think the powers that ought not be looked at that and said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that two people have to work all the time, and you have to have daycare, and you have to, and then they went to work on the education system, dumbing it down. So they took civics classes away, they took social studies classes away, and they've dumbed down the population on purpose, and they've made it so that that mom and dad have to work, and they've taken away people's abilities to have leisure time to really reflect on things, and they've really attacked, like I said, through the education. So nobody reads books anymore, of course, right? And with the advent of the iPhone and the soundbite culture, people just don't have time anymore, and people aren't smart enough anymore to really figure out what's going on. I think things going to have to hit rock bottom before people wake up.
So I'm putting the link out there in the chat again. We'd love to have more of you jump on. I love getting your calls, especially when you show your faces like the RB Ham does. So it's great. So
by the way, I went on Substack, and I searched the public wheel on Substack, and I couldn't find your channel on Substack there.
Interesting.
Well, he's got the under his name, the publicwheel.substack.com. Is that right, Ben? Right, Vince?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's
okay.
Right
I'm going to make sure I subscribe to that.
No,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Send me a contact or something through the page there.
I will.
All right. Good to meet you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, RB. Take care, man.
You bet. Bye.
Take it easy. RB Ham, courageous fighter up in the Great White North, and what the hell, who keeps calling me?
They've got a hell of a job in front of them.
And he was one of the Canadian convoy truckers, and they
Really?
went after him. I think they fined him $50,000. He's been trying to raise money since. That's just ridiculous. But
Wow.
The man, he lost his pension driving a truck for a living. I mean, it's unbelievable. But that's
speaking of pensions, did you see what the new Medicare rate's going to be?
No, my wife is still working, so I'm still in her. But I'm interested in that because that'll take out. What's it going to be now?
It's now going to be $202.90 a month.
Oh, what is it now? Is it 160 or something?
No, it's 185.
Okay, God, it's going to go up every year. Every year.
So, what's the deal? You're going to pay this money to an insurance company. You're going to pay it to the government, and why? Why do they even tax us for that? Why all those years of grabbing that money for the Medicare tax?
I think I'm the only one. You have Bernie Sanders saying Medicare for all. I think when I first understood how bad this deal was, where it's you pay into it your entire life, which is like Social Security, so it's your own money coming back, but you still have to pay that monthly fee, which is now going to be $202, and it only covers 80%. It's
Yeah,
crappy
well, that's the
insurance.
part B. Part
Mm.
A you get, which is the hospital, but part B is what works into the doctor's offices. And then yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta have a little
So you have
extra.
supplemental. So it's created an entire. That's how the jobs they create. Supplemental insurance industry because the insurance isn't satisfied. It's terrible. It's
The
just
insurance
God. It's just
agents, the insurance business is a con. It's a scam. You know what's sad is they make a lot of their money in the market.
mhm.
They take your money and they put it out in the market. Sometimes I sit there and I think about how much money I've spent with just like the car insurance in my whole life.
Yeah.
What a ripoff! And the
Yeah.
state law says that we have to pay it. It's uh,
Well, it's everything else, and it's again, it's part of. It's not even big government, but I mean, something like that. If you look at something like driving, why should that be a privilege? Why shouldn't it be a
yeah.
right? It's illegal. You should have the right to drive. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But that's Virginia though. It's not all states. See, Virginia's like that.
Well,
Virginia
don't you
makes
need
it.
insurance? You need insurance in all states, don't you?
Well, you do need insurance and all. As far as I know, you do. But Virginia
Yeah.
used to have that little thing where you could pay money and not drive with insurance, but that doesn't mean
Oh,
you're not
uninsured
liable.
motorist fee. Yeah, yeah,
You're still liable for it. But then
yeah,
you and I still pay for that in Virginia.
yeah,
There is an
yeah.
uninsured. That's all part of the plan. And I know I get the wife and I get good discounts on this stuff, but it's still going up and going up and going up.
Everything goes up.
And
Yeah,
our income is not going up and going up.
yeah. That's that, and that's the plan. That's why again, the conservatives, as I keep stressing, Tucker Carlson did a good job of that on his Fox News show. He started pressing conservatives. When you talk about this Mondami, or well, he hadn't come along yet, but somebody like that, when he comes along and he appeals to the Muslims, but he also appealed to a lot of people by saying he wasn't going to go to Israel. He was going to serve the people in New York, which is the right answer to give. The
Mm-hmm.
rest of them gave the wrong answer. So I mean, I don't know what he'll do. I think he's comes from a big Bollywood family. He's installed too. But what's the answer? What are the conservatives' answer that you're not going to Israel enough? That's their answer, and they have no answer to the reality of young people struggling out there to get jobs, and they call them snowflakes. Nobody wants to work. It's nonsense. You go out and try to, from your own experience, it's very hard to find anything out there that's any good. Even you'll hear about, well, they're
Well, the
something like
last
McDonald's or something. They're paying, and they're not paying what they say when you go there actually apply for the job.
that last job that I had, the people in their 30s resented us old folks. They didn't really want us around. They made it very difficult for me to be in that job. And I finally said, I'm old enough to call it quits. I said, screw it. I'm not going to deal with these people. They really don't. They got a chip on their shoulder. So I guess all the stuff they hear that we can't buy a house, and I did hear that from them. We can't buy a house, and I've heard people say, "Well, the boomers did it." Well, okay, I'm on the tail end of that.
Yeah.
And I got to agree. I mean, they're the people who allowed this stuff to continue to snowball downhill. As long as they were getting a piece of it here in town, and you know how it is in town, right there. So
we were spoiled. We didn't know. I didn't know it at the time, but I came in at the tail end a little before you, but of the baby boomers. But I still enjoyed an idyllic time in terms of childhood because that was the post-war boom economy, and it's the only time the economy's been great in America for late 40s to maybe early 70s, mid 70s, something like that. So maybe 30 years at the most. But it's never been anything like it before. So we were spoiled, and most boomers think it's still like that. I believe once they hit it big, they still act like that there are opportunities out there that you can just get. And it's not. It's just, they're not even limited opportunities. And they do.
if you're
It infuriates me that people that have gotten theirs, and that's why so many of these young people hate the boomers. I don't blame them.
if you're H-1B, I mean, you've got an opportunity.
Yeah.
There was a period there where I was doing temp work and I was inside of a software company, and they had literally two sides of the house. On the hardware side, they had all Muslims. On the software side, they had all Indians. And these guys only hired their own.
Yeah.
And there again, I'm glad I was a temp because I didn't get along with either of them, either side. I couldn't wait to get off that one. But that was almost 20 years ago. That's how long this crap's been going on. When I worked for Unisys, Unisys made a big deal about hiring people who were like cable installers because they figured they could get them dirt cheap. And then eventually they started bringing in their own H-1B people. So that was 25 years ago. Yeah. Saw it happen. Saw it happening.
No, and you've written on Substack about your own experience and how you have an interesting background, and you've started, I think, 4 businesses or something. You talk about how you were, a victim of affirmative action or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Talk if you want to, share what you want about that.
Oh, well, that was one of those big companies where I had moved up. I was actually kind of a specialist, and I got hired in as a specialist out in the field. And they could see that I could handle my workload and my clients and so forth and so on. And in fact, on that job, that's where I had the clients also in the Pentagon. I think the only government building I didn't have a client in was CIA up there in McLean and the White House itself, because I also had the White House communications office and I had the old executive office building. So those were the only 2 government buildings I don't think I've ever been in, at least job related. But so I get in there and I become a fancy, I don't know what you would call it, a dispatcher. They call them a call delivery coordinator or something. It's like the fancy trash man as the sanitation engineer, as far as I was concerned. But it was a step in the right direction. And so I had 20 some technicians under me at that point. And there were, Robert. So there were 3 other guys one of the other guys was running all of the network engineer guys. So Unisys had a lot of network stuff. And then myself and the other guy, just like me, he handled DC and Maryland. And then we had a little boss who was in between our big boss. So at one point, there was this black woman who worked at Swift over here in Culpeper. And they had a couple of technicians in there that got into a fight right there in one of the NOCs. So see, Swift had, I think they had 2 NOCs. They worked around the clock because they moved the money. That's what happens there. So they fired this lady. Swift actually wanted them to fire this lady because she didn't stop the fight. Well, you're asking a poor woman to stop a fight. I don't know about that. But anyway, they fired her. And then they were afraid she was going to sue them. So they created a job for her. And they came to us 3 white guys. And they said, we need you guys to apply for this. Oh, it'll be good. It'll be good practice to do this. And, by the way, she's going to get the job. And then the 3 of us looked at each other and we said, you're kidding. Why do I want to do that? That's going to go on our record.
This is a black woman.
Yeah. She's a nice lady. She wasn't a bad lady. But, we're sitting there, this is going to go on our record that we applied for something and we're turned down. Okay. So I don't want to do that. And I hadn't even been in my position for that long. It might have been a year. I'll put it that way. It might have been a year. But I took on to that. I was still very good with it. And sure as, I want to cuss here, sure as SH, you know what? There comes a day where my big boss comes in and he says, hey, Vinny, I need you to teach this lady the call system.
Of course.
Well, I'm like, really? Okay. So she sits down and I didn't know that she was the lady that was going to get the job. And I'm sitting there showing her this and showing us that. And she goes, well, I don't really have to know how this works because see, I'm going to get promised this. I got promised this job. And I was told by such and such, another boss further up, that I'm going to get the job anyway, but go ahead. So I'm sitting there going, and I can't say a word, right? I can't tell her that I'm also applied for the job.
Yeah.
So she gets the job, and sure as hell, even though she's supposed to know how to run the system, she just turns around and says, "You guys dispatch these things for me, please. Can you handle it?" Some of these, Don, some of these were 4 or 2 hour response calls. The Unisys had a whole series of servers that were first of their kind, self-repairing. This was 25 years ago. Right? So people talk about technology. I saw it. These things repaired themselves. But once it does that, it sends off an alarm, and then you got to go out inside of 2 hours, and it's got to be fixed or whatever. And that's the contract they had. Yeah. So we ended up doing the work anyway. We got screwed. You know what she did? 6 months later, she quit, went to sell real estate. Now, one of the guys, the guy who was the oldest of us, had been in the company for a few years. He knew enough that the company had broken the rules on not informing us that we didn't get the job, which they didn't. Well, 3 of us other guys, we didn't know, but this other guy, he did know. And he got a cash settlement. Can you believe that?
Yeah,
The son of a bitch, he didn't tell us. Sure.
But just the idea that and this is why I think you hear insiders say about almost any of these jobs, they know who they're going to hire ahead of time. There's no competition, and real competition, and what you guys are doing is just for show. And in kind of a reverse way, the NFL has the stupid Rooney Rule, which they kowtow to blacks, and they have to they have to interview minorities for every head coaching job, even though they know who they're going to hire, and they hire a certain number of them anyhow. But the opposite obviously stands for what you're talking about, and certainly in government. I mean, I don't know if you ever worked for the government or not, but I mean, just
I know people who have.
Yeah, disproportionate number of blacks that work in government is just mind-boggling. So there's no way you can tell me they're not meeting a quota.
Yeah. Nope. That's exactly what's happening. I think of all the guys that that I know, they've all been affected by it at one point in their careers. Yeah. Most of them a little later now, the guys in my group, but they've all been affected by it. And those guys, they're not dumb. The guys that I know are very smart. All of those guys went through 4-year colleges, so they're not stupid. But they certainly never got to the potential that they could have had.
Well, I think that's the, and that's why I really feel for you, because it's I think you sense you're now realizing you didn't reach your potential. But it's it's just like when I talk about it on alt media, the fact that we can't. It's not a level playing field, so we can't really compete with some of the bigger shows because and you certainly can't compete with the mainstream media because it's not a level playing field. But in the business world, certainly in the government, it's definitely not a level playing field because it's not the question of the best person is ever hired, because there's so many other factors they have to consider: certain number of minorities, certain number of women, and now probably transgenders, for all I know, which are obviously even harder to find. But that's just wrong, and everybody I think understands that. But I guess if you're benefiting from it, so I guess it's hard to talk blacks and people that may benefit from this into supporting it. But I mean, it should just be the best candidate, and it's ridiculous. And again, I think I can't even imagine what do you think the founding fathers would think of affirmative action? I mean, this is mind-boggling. We're still now we call it DEI, but it's the same thing.
I think the Federalists would have thought that as long as they were going to get a piece of the action, they would have helped engineer it. The anti-Federalists would have been completely against it. That they wouldn't have even considered it. And I know the first guy that was on the video talked about the Civil War not being about slavery, which is true.
Yeah.
But one has to, if you look at the Confederate Constitution, the slavery was in the Confederate Constitution 7 times. So it was important to the South to keep that agricultural condition in place. They did make quite a few uh, how can I say, avenues for other states to join them and also have slavery. So, I mean, it was a big deal. You can't deny that. And I know someone else just recently pointed to slavery as what was I reading? I was reading. Oh, I know. I was reading another fraud, Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Yeah,
another fraud.
Mhm.
Yeah, let me show you something here. I like to make beef about this. I'm gonna hold this up. Can you read that?
Soviet Affairs Analysis Service.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you do a search on that, look for the one that's connected to Harvard University. So that thing says it was published at Mannhardstrasse, number 6 in Munich, Germany. Well, it wasn't. It was actually put together by Moynihan while he was at Harvard. And so that whole business of that analysis, he did a number of those, created what's known as the Sino-Soviet split. He claimed that he was actually getting that information off of notes from Khrushchev, 1960 and 61. That fraud was perpetrated throughout all of this, since 1960, 61. And look at Moynihan's career. So Moynihan goes out and he makes a connection between slavery and the need for affirmative action in the 1960s. And a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon. And that's why I wrote that piece last Labor Day about slavery and its continuation and the fight that we had over it after the fact, after the war, after Lincoln's executive order. And that's all that proclamation was an executive order.
Yeah.
So
it was done for political expediency also, because Lincoln had previously said, he would save the Union. If he could do it without freeing any slaves, he would do it. And, that's, so he clearly, he recognized for public relations purposes, he started, talking about this. As I pointed out, Lincoln was a corporatist lawyer, and he at least once represented the owner of a runaway slave in a court case.
mm-hmm.
He didn't represent the runaway slave, the great emancipator. He represented the owner. I mean, what does that say about him?
During the debates, he said that people had the right to own slaves.
Yeah.
Right? During the great debates that they had, he said they had the right to own slaves. So there's I'm fortunate to have a collection of books that were printed by Congress from all the presidents from Washington through McKinley. And if you read, I guess it was his 4th annual address to Congress, he talks about the freed slaves and how they're now new citizens, and that they will also be liable to help pay off the debt of the war through taxation. And if they refuse to pay the taxation, in his words, says they will be sent back to a place more their climate.
Well, Lincoln said this in his last State of the Union?
Well, it was in the 4th State of the Union address.
Oh, wow! To look at that. Wow. Well,
I've got a copy, and I'll email it to you.
Yeah, that's
I scanned that one out of the book. I mean, some of this stuff is great, which fun.
He was, and again, that's why I think so much of what you have there is the problem is that right now you have the crazed, my old party, the Democrats, are absolutely insane. They're woke, crazy, whatever they are. But the supposed opposition to them that seem more rational, the Republicans, their hero is this guy Lincoln, our greatest tyrant. And and you try to enlighten them, and some of them are enlightened. Like Ron Paul wrote the foreword to my book, and he understands that. Judge Napolitano, there's some big voices that understand it. Most of them, they shut down when you mention Lincoln.
When I look at, and I had an old friend who was very good with the history of Eisenhower, and he was always reminding me that Eisenhower had a portrait of Robert E. Lee in the Oval Office.
Wow.
And obviously the connections with West Point, but when it came to, and I talked about this with Victor the other night, 1956, Israel invaded Gaza, which that wasn't the first time either. They had done it back in the 20s. These people had that, so even before they became a nation. But this is 1956. So they had gone to Gaza and they wanted to do the same thing. And they were killing the people and doing whatever. And the United Nations, they told Israel to stop and get out. Well, then by the time January rolls around, 1957, it comes up to Eisenhower. And Eisenhower says, hey, get the hell out of there or you're going to pay. You're going to pay the price. And guess what happened? They left. They packed up and left. And until a couple of years ago, they'd had their backing and forth and all that, but nothing like you see now. So where the hell is Trump with this stuff? Why can't he be more Eisenhower? And Eisenhower, I don't think he was a big Lincolnist. Not to my mind.
Eisenhower. I think he was responsible for a war crime himself. In Operation Keelhaul in World War II. But yeah, as a president, he did a pretty good job. I mean, especially comparatively speaking, he did stand up to Israel. He talked about the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
Stin in the chat talks about Abraham Lincoln was anti-Christian. He absolutely was. What he did, Sin, is he basically wrote a response to the New Testament, where he raged against the New Testament. And you're exactly right. His again, this is urban legend, but it's pretty much, you find it everywhere in the old writings, that when he was about to enter politics, his advisor said, you got to get rid of this. You can't have this in your background. So supposedly they burned it. But Lincoln, I don't think, and that's why it's so ridiculous. After Lincoln tried the Emancipation Proclamation thing and started talking about slavery, then he starts talking about God in the last year or two of the war. And how this was God's will. And the evidence is Lincoln didn't even believe in God. So he was, I can't tell you how bad a guy this is. I mean, just what we know, for him to be the secular saint of our civilization, and he is. What does that say about our civilization?
Well, as I recall, that whenever Sherman was lobbing stuff into Atlanta, he would send reports back to Lincoln, and Lincoln would applaud and practically.
Oh, yes.
That he'd heard about these innocent civilians getting their heads blown off by cannon fire.
Lincoln was entertained by it, exactly. That's something.
Yes.
Robin Lee said, this has been a great conversation. Please come back, Vince. Absolutely. Well, Vince is welcome back here anytime. But
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Rhonda. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody in the chat room. Rhonda, we haven't seen you in a while. I like to see your lovely face getting up there. So it's, shining on there. It's nice to have you here, and certainly nice to have her. Deborah Wheeler, thank you for being here. And she says, thank you, Vince. Happy Thanksgiving. Absolutely.
Same to all of you. Thank you.
Same to all of you. Yeah, and I hope you all have somebody. That's my next Substack. I'm going to write about Friendsgiving. It's a new thing they're talking about, and it's a sad commentary, I think, on our society.
Friendsgiving?
Friendsgiving. More popular, people that don't have family or don't want to be with their family.
Sure. Yeah, we've done that.
Yeah. So, but they're calling it Friendsgiving now, and it's I don't know, something I think is missed, but we're just about out of time. We covered so many things, but there's so much I can talk to you about. You should be a historian. I would have loved to have you as a history teacher.
You know what we should do? I think we should do a live from Kilroy sometime.
Wow, yeah, that would be cool. We got to do that. I have to figure out how to set that up.
Get one of the guys to do the commentator and do a little small version of the McLaughlin group.
Yeah, I got to figure out how to do that. I'm figuring out how I can do. Of course, I have to have somebody hold my hand and all this stuff. But
I'm in pretty good with the people over at Kilroy's, so I might be able to work something out.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so Vince, anything you promote what you want to promote? Give out your links. Anything you want to close with?
That's the best place right there.
Publicwheel.substack.com. If you're not watching the video, the Public Wheel, WEAL.substack.com.
I guess unless you're in Canada and they've got you blocked, probably.
So it's always a pleasure talking with you, and we'll be getting together for lunch in a couple of weeks. It's great. This is one of my favorite areas of history. I love talking about the birth of this nation and unfortunately what happened, but maybe what could have been. But it's
Yeah.
nice that people like you remind us of it, and because there's not too many people, especially that remember that era of history. So thanks again, Vince Agnelli, and
Thank you, sir.
thanks everybody
Thank you,
thanks
everybody.
for listening. 60 years, 62 years tomorrow for the JFK assassination. Remember,
Wow.
they're keeping the lie up, and have a great Thanksgiving next week. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to you next week. I protest.